my Christmas cards. Oh, while I look my store of pictured treasures through, as in the pages of a book, I read kind greetings, sweet and true, and faces rise upon the waves of memory that o'er time's dim sea, the treasures of its nooks and caves are softly bringing back to me. And some are gay and some are sad, yet cannot bring me thoughts of pain. 'Tis only memories sweet and glad that Christmas cards bring back again. For all are fraught with hope and love, so may the card I send to thee in some hereafter Christmas prove a happy memory of me.
The Christmas card has been a hallmark of the holiday season since the Victorian era, with Americans still sending an estimated 1.3 billion cards each year. It is such an ingrained part of our modern celebration of the holidays that we often don't stop to consider how the tradition itself came to be. The idea of giving small tokens of remembrance or good luck around the turn of the new year dates back centuries. Sending a Christmas letter to friends or relatives was a long-standing English tradition. But a perfect storm of factors, Victorian sentimentality combined with technological advances, created the enduring tradition of the Christmas card. However, the path to our modern Christmas card was not a straightforward one, as Americans and the British created new cultural understandings of Christmas in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. And sometimes that meant that Christmas looked a little, well, odd. Hello, my name is Jessica, a public historian at Brucemore, a National Trust for Historic Preservation site. If you want to hear what interesting histories we have to share with you next, make sure to subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss future videos. To understand the origins of our modern Christmas traditions like sending Christmas cards, you have to understand what Christmas celebrations look like in the United Kingdom and the United States before the 19th century. How to celebrate Christmas was something that Christians struggled to define for centuries. Christians absorbed many traditional pagan end-of-year celebrations and secular harvest festivals into their celebration of the birth of Jesus of Nazareth. By the 13th century, most of Europe celebrated some variation of the holiday. Without getting too much into the politics of the churches, parliament, and English monarchs, suffice to say that by the 17th century, Christmas celebrations in England were indulgent festivals of debauchery that Puritans did not like and tried to put a stop to. When their religious fervor brought them to the colonies, they tried to suppress Christmas celebrations with varying levels of success. The scorn was not universal among European colonists, though. As cultures mixed and old traditions were disrupted, new Christmas traditions emerged. By the 18th and early 19th centuries in both the US and the UK, Christmas celebrations were not universal. Some regions and communities ignored the holiday altogether. In places where it was celebrated, it often involved public drunkenness, firing guns, roving bands of working-class men entering homes and demanding food, drink, or money, and raucous noise created outside by improvised bands wandering down streets. For various reasons in both the US and the UK, some factions of society longed for a return to, but really an invented tradition of Christmas celebrations based predominantly in the home rather than in the streets. 3 authors are credited with creating this mythical Christmas past in popular memory: Washington Irving, Clement Clarke Moore, and Charles Dickens. Washington Irving and Clement Clarke Moore helped to create the modern conceptualization of Santa Claus, which has become our most recognizable symbol of Christmas. In Washington Irving's Knickerbocker's History of New York, a satirical history of New York published in 1810, Irving drew on the Dutch legend of Sinterklaas, based on the patron saint of children, Saint Nicholas. Irving mentions Saint Nicholas 25 times in this work. In 1822, another New Yorker, Clement Clarke Moore, is credited for writing A Visit from Saint Nicholas, or as we more commonly call it today, The Night Before Christmas, drawing on the same Dutch legends and centering the Christmas celebration around children in the home. Jumping forward a couple decades and going back across the Atlantic, in 1843, Charles Dickens published his novella, A Christmas Carol, forever changing how the English-speaking world looked at Christmas. Hitting at just the right time, Dickens captured the cultural zeitgeist of the early Victorian period. His novella perfectly encapsulated the social desire to make Christmas celebrations both respectable and unifying, and combined it with the desire to reform British attitudes towards poverty. Throw in Queen Victoria popularizing the German tradition of the Christmas tree, and you've got yourself a modern Christmas. So now that we understand how American and British people understood Christmas around 1840, we can finally come to understand how the Christmas card came to be. As I mentioned earlier, sending a Christmas letter or greeting was a common English Christmas tradition among those who celebrated and were literate. But Sir Henry Cole, English inventor and civil servant, sought to make sending those holiday greetings a little easier and to give people a reason to use a service that he had helped invent. Cole helped to introduce uniform penny post and the postage stamp in the UK in 1840. In 1843, he commissioned lithographic artist John Calcutt Horsley to create the first commercially available Christmas card. This card cost 6 pence, or 6 pennies, making it a luxury item. About 1,000 of the cards were produced. This card really captures the essence of how Victorians were trying to define Christmas, as it depicts a family enjoying a Christmas feast and some wine together. And yes, that is a child drinking wine. At least they're drinking at home and not in the Christmas festivities out on the streets. The depiction of alcohol consumption on the card drew criticism in its day. Eventually, Messrs. Cole and Horsley were forgiven for encouraging drunkenness by depicting drinking on the first Christmas card, with one commenter saying, "If we investigated all the cases of drunkenness in all of these years, could we find a single one remotely traceable to this design of Mr. Horsley's?" But this card also captures some of the concern for the poor during the holidays that Dickens was making a part of Christmas tradition. As you can see, both of the side panels depict the poor being clothed and fed. So even with the very first Christmas card, you can see how the celebration of Christmas was being crystallized, at least in the UK. The US was slightly behind in developing a standardized postal system, and it would not be until after the Civil War that Congress standardized the delivery of mail. Americans were also more geographically separated, given westward expansion, than their European counterparts. But Christmas cards started to catch on in the US, even if at first it was a little slow. The first American Christmas card is attributed to Albany artist and merchant Richard H. Peace. Drawing once again on the Dutch-inspired Santa Claus, Peace created an illustration for a card that was used to market his business, Peace's Great Variety Store in the Temple of Fancy, around 1850. The card constitutes both the first American-produced Christmas card and one of the first depictions of Santa Claus in advertising. It has similar design themes to the Cole-Horsley card, a familial Christmas scene, but this time with no depictions of caring for the less fortunate. A few years, and one completed transcontinental railway line later, in 1882, a Washington state postal worker was quoted as saying, "I thought last year would be the end of the Christmas card mania, but I don't think so now. Why, 4 years ago, a Christmas card was a rare thing. The public then got the mania, and the business seems to be getting larger every year. I don't know what we'll do if it keeps on." The source of this poor, overworked postal workers' frustration in the US was likely Louis Prang. Prang was a German immigrant who settled in Boston and worked as an engraver. He eventually went into lithographic and copper printing plate manufacturing. He was a savvy businessman and saw a new market for album cards and pictures. He first printed Christmas cards to be sold in the British market in 1873, at the suggestion of the wife of his London agent. He entered the US market the following year, making him the first person to mass market holiday cards in America. Prang couldn't meet demand the first season he sold Christmas cards, but by the following year, his 300-person workforce printed 5 million Christmas cards. The American Christmas card mania was spreading. As Prang turned out millions of cards and importers brought in millions more, Americans made sending Christmas cards a tradition, but the symbology of Christmas was still in flux. Just what was a Christmas card supposed to look like? Depictions of Santa, family dinners, and Christmas trees? Sure. But fairies, dead birds, and Krampus coming to kidnap naughty children? Also yes. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a little bit like the Wild West of Christmas symbology. The identity of Christmas was crystallizing in the public's mind, but there was still room for conversation about what was an acceptable depiction of the season on a Christmas card. This is especially true in the US, as immigrants from across the world made America their home and brought their different Christmas traditions with them. Let's look at some examples of some different, and sometimes strange, Christmas cards. First, let's talk about Christmas cards like this one. While the text expresses Christmas sentiment, the imagery is decidedly un-Christmas-like. Many Victorian Christmas cards reused imagery from other lithographic scraps or cards. And because the images were still considered beautiful and the identity of Christmas wasn't fully formed, it didn't seem at all strange to Victorians to get Christmas cards with blooming spring flowers depicted on them. It's also important to note that Victorians also loved imagery related to fairies and elves. Many Victorians even believed in mystical creatures like fairies and goblins, especially in the British Isles. So it makes sense that these images would appear on Christmas cards. Some examples include fairies that are depicted as cherubic children, another common Victorian representation. Other times the fairies were depicted as more elf-like and in seasonal settings. Like Santa Claus, the association of Christmas with elves was popularized in A Visit from St. Nicholas. I don't think elves roasting a Christmas mouse was what Moore had in mind when he published the poem, though. When we think of Christmas animals today, we might think of an animal that lives somewhere snowy, like a polar bear or a penguin. Victorian animal imagery was a little more all over the map. Lots of cards with cute cats and dogs were printed, as one might expect, but other animals like frogs and insects were also common themes. Many of these cards were intended to be humorous and eye-catching, a way to grab the consumer's attention in a quickly flooding market. Examples like these sledding anthropomorphic chickens or dancing frogs certainly still grab our attention and make us say, "Hey, remember that year that Jessica sent us that weird moth Christmas card? That was weird, right?" Sometimes the mystical and animal worlds were a little darker, though. Andy Williams' hit Christmas song, "It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year," makes mention of a Christmas tradition that Victorians enjoyed, but seems out of place to us. It sings about telling scary ghost stories at Christmas. This came from traditional storytelling done around the Yule fire during winter solstice celebrations. Some Christmas cards captured this theme with cards depicting witches riding brooms and wishing readers a Merry Christmas. The most famous Victorian depiction of ghosts at Christmas would be Dickens' Haunting of Ebenezer Scrooge. My favorite mixing of spooky things in Christmas, though, is this card featuring cherub bat jockeys. Some of the reoccurring themes that I think look strangest to our modern eyes are violence and death. Take these cards, for example. Most of us would not want to receive a Christmas card with a dead bird on it. But for Victorians, still deciding on how Christmas was going to be celebrated and depicted, these cards probably would have been proudly displayed in the home. Dead birds were a complex symbol in the Victorian era. They represented sympathy and the fragility of life. They may have also been used on Christmas cards to represent the celebration of St. Stephen's Day, where Celtic tradition dictated a wren be hunted and killed to bring good luck the following year. Other cards depicted some strange acts of violence, like a frog murdering another frog for money, or a bunch of anthropomorphic mice about to feast on a dead cat. Death, unfortunately, was more commonplace in Victorian life, so perhaps the images don't seem as jarring to Victorians as they do to us today. A theme we keep coming back to is this continuing negotiation about how Christmas was going to be depicted and celebrated. We've talked a lot about Santa Claus, but it's important to remember that he wasn't codified in public memory yet. There were other gift bringers that developed from the legend of Saint Nicholas. There was the British tradition of Father Christmas, Père Noël in France, and Weihnachtsmann in Germany. Much like Santa Claus, there was debate about how these figures should be represented. Are they young or old? What color of robe should they wear? Do they have to be men? Some card designers didn't think so. Many gift bringers were also assigned a second duty, scaring children into behaving. The tradition of gift bringers as disciplinarians accompanies virtually every Western gift bringer myth. So it makes sense that early Christmas cards would depict versions of gift bringers as disciplinarians. Even the first American representation of St. Nicholas depicts the saint holding a birch rod while giving gifts to one child and disciplining another. But with the American version of a jolly Santa Claus winning the battle for Christmas gift-bringer supremacy, the disciplinarian versions were not long-lived on Christmas cards. This brings us to perhaps the strangest of the strange Christmas imagery depicted on cards, Krampus. Like Santa, there were a lot of different myths that have gotten rolled into one figure. Many Germanic European countries had a devil-like figure that was a counterpart to Saint Nicholas. He is often depicted as looking a lot like the devil with horns, cloven hooves, and a long pointed tongue. He is also commonly depicted carrying chains, bags, or baskets to stuff naughty children in, and carrying switches. Krampus and his various counterparts were never widely popular in America, but cards depicting him were sometimes sent by immigrants, so there was an import market for Krampus. For example, here in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, home of the National Czech and Slovak Museum and Library, there was a large Czech immigrant population. So many children here may have gotten cards like this one depicting Cert, the Czech version of Krampus. Some of my favorite versions of Krampus cards I have seen are ones that depict Krampus as a woman. We can really be anything we want to be, ladies. As already mentioned, with American versions of Santa Claus as a happy, benevolent fellow winning out against the disciplinarian gift-bringers, the Krampus tradition was not long for depiction on Christmas cards. But Krampus has made a resurgence and might be returning to a mailbox near you if you're not careful. We hope that you've enjoyed this exploration of the history of Christmas cards and some of the history of our Christmas traditions today. So this year, if you keep the tradition of sending holiday cards, think a little bit about the meaning behind the cards you select. Did you pick a traditional American Santa Claus, an image of your family or your pets? Or maybe you like the darker side of the holidays and you went for a Krampus. Whatever traditions you keep, we hope that you have a happy holiday season and that you'll follow the Artisan studio at Brucemore into the new year.